Trump was reported to have berated the Crown Prince for negotiating quite separately with Zelensky, which is just ridiculous, by the way. But this tie-up is going to be so important. There's the very obvious way that Zelensky does need money. And Zelensky is trying to get into the Saudi Sovereign Fund, for example, to help him invest, because the money isn't going to come from America. Where he buys the stuff from is going to be important. But for
and Robert,
postmodern war, tactical.
No, go on. Sorry, I thought you stopped.
Postmodern war. Ukraine is now the laboratory of the world. And what Ukraine offers is methods of air defense, improvised air defense, innovation. That's what it does all the time. And that's the real offer that he has with his technology, and it's a very considerable technology, to the Gulf states who have been let down by America in America's promissory note of we can provide air defense for you. Well, have they? Oil fields, desalination plants, hotels, and airports, at least 3 set alight. And this is why this is not the minnow and the whale. It's actually a real partnership. And I think that if Trump stops to think and stops shouting at the Secretary General of NATO, who is a representative and is not a statesman, I mean, a very experienced statesman himself, Mark Rutte, he should realize that is what's going on with the European NATO powers, the Gulf, Zelensky, and particularly the principal Arab powers of the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council. We have seen a revolution in diplomatic affairs in the last 3 weeks, if only we could spot it.
And the US president, obviously, he met the NATO Secretary General this week. He again is reported to have vented his frustration over the alliance. White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt quoted Trump as saying NATO, they were tested and they failed during the Iran war. What future do you see for NATO?
Oh, I think NATO will go on. Because I think even Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, certainly Mark Milley, one of his predecessors, NATO is a force multiplier for America. This is the clown car aspect of Trump diplomacy and statesmanship. If he says we're going to withdraw from NATO, by the way, he won't be able to do it within the time frame of his presidency because it'll have to go through Congress. But I'm not going to fund it. He weakens America, and America is much weaker than we generally realize. It's used up an awful lot of ammunition and ordnance on this strange war in Iran. It is saddled with debt. We all are, and debt is one of the big problems. He wants $200 billion for the war. He's not going to get it, but he needs to restock the ammunition. Look at the pile of state that the stocks of Patriot missiles are getting into now. They only make about maximum 700 a year. They had 4,000 in stock, and they've been pooping them off left and right, and particularly that's why they've been trying to gather so many back from those they've sold it to already, like Poland. But that it's worth looking at things like Patriots and Tomahawk because they are emblematic of the jam that America is getting itself into, and it didn't need to.
Where does all of this leave Ukraine?
I think it leaves Ukraine in a very, very difficult situation, because the one thing that is in the top of my mind over Ukraine and Iran, they make all sorts of claims, particularly the populists, obviously, about the people and what the people should do. But we have got people-free populism. That's the thing of MAGA populism. It's only our people. It's not the people we claim to speak for. And it's civic society. That's the real weakness of Ukraine. Can it really hold together? Yeah, they can hold it. The toughs, they're doing really pretty well, as we've said in many aspects, on the front line. But it's what's behind the front line that is really so difficult. And this is the appalling thing. Sorry, it's my latest article for The Independent, whether they publish it or not, let's hope today. is about the people.
We shall be looking.
The people of Iran. I mean, I was listening to Ezra Cohen, former advisor, uber Trumpista, today talking on the radio and saying, "Oh, the people have got to do this and the people have got to do that." This hard, really tough Ayatollah military regime, part two, is fighting its own people, and that's why they brought in all these militias. At least 3 major militias from Afghanistan, Pakistan, and from the mobilization forces in Syria to repress the population. Well, that's not what's happening in Ukraine. But in Ukraine, they're in great difficulty. And part of the thing is, of course, all these people that came out, so much of Ukraine is outside Ukraine now. Not many really want to go back. And that's the difficulty. And in both cases, it's a similar situation of a terribly broken infrastructure.
Robert, you said earlier that President Zelensky would be at pains, or is at pains at the moment, to keep Ukraine on the world agenda, to keep allies close. Do you get a sense that is working?
I do, but because he is remarkable, because most people, I mean, look what happened in times of victory of somebody like Churchill. I don't particularly like playing the Churchill card, but, a thoroughly grateful nation or not, voted him out. The way that, he's been criticized, he's got corrupt allies and partners. Well, you couldn't be anywhere in power, in Ukraine, as far as I can make out, with having at least some corrupt partnership, because finance is so dependent on oligarchs. But his reputation has held up remarkably well. It's a tremendous achievement with low cards, with this overwhelming force of manpower, ironmongery, military equipment facing him that came over the horizon on February the 24th, 2022, that he's kept it there. And I think for serious politicians, and I think in many countries, there is real respect for that. Respect in the true sense. And funny enough, it's respect for power and power of personality that even Machiavelli would have recognized.
Where does Hungary fit into all of this? Because the elections are taking place this weekend. Vice President J.D. Vance, US Vice President J.D. Vance, was giving quite a performance, wasn't he, before that audience, ringing up the US president to talk up how much Hungary meant to him in front of an audience, endorsing Viktor Orban. How much does that election matter to Ukraine?
I wondered if J.D. Vance had been reading Lewis Carroll just before he went there with both Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, because he accused Europe, the big enemy, and this is where things are getting a bit silly now, of interfering unwarrantedly in elections, in internal business of a member like Hungary. And of course, we're encouraging you to vote for Orban. We're not interfering at all. I mean, this is what's really beginning to concern, is the sheer clownishness of American diplomacy at the moment. It is, as one of the best White House commentators, New York Times, put, it is the big clown shoes coming out of the White House all the time that is so worrying. Because a lot of this stuff, Kate, for me anyway, doesn't make sense. It's a sort of strange trying to do a Rubik's Cube with the English language, but it never quite aligns. It never quite makes sense. And we've particularly seen it so in the diplomacy regarding Iran and Israel and Lebanon. Your question, I don't really know. I think what I fear is if Orban loses, or he loses by a whisker, he's going to go down very, very badly. But there's not much that his prime agent and supporter, who would be Putin, is going to be able to do anything. I think Trump will say something, in victory or defeat, whatever happens, to Orban. But I think it's likely, and it should galvanize Europe to see that it has to move away or detach for its own purposes from America. And I think it'll be part of that process. I don't think it's going to be cataclysmic, but I think that if he wins or loses by fair means or foul, there's going to be a tremendous stink.
Yeah, and you mentioned, Robert, excuse me, you mentioned there the sort of the clownish nature of US diplomacy at the moment. And we are all used to the unpredictable and loose language of the US president, who threatened, notably this week, to kill off Iran's civilization in one night. Words do matter, don't they? How damaging do you think those words were, for example, in the way that China views the US?
Well, I think China is very interesting, and Xi himself, in his view of of what China represents culturally, for somebody, in his pronouncements is sort of classic Chinese version Marxist-Leninist. He is actually very, very big on Chinese culture, which is millennia old, and he would regard this with disdain. I quite like his demeanor. Margaret